You're listening to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, aimed at helping photographers learn how to make the leap from amateur to pro. Hello, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Business podcast, a joint effort brought to you by Photo Focus and Skip Cohen University. This is Shamira Young, and I'm joined by the one and only Skip Cohen.
Wow.
Skip.
I think there are a few people around lately that would say, thank God there's only one and only. So, yes, I am here. Live from Florida. If we don't complain about the bone-chilling 65-degree weather in the wintertime, we complain about the afternoon rains and the heat in the summertime. So you can't keep everybody happy.
Must be nice, yes.
Right. No, it's interesting because every single day the weather has been the same. And I'll ask Alexa every night, what's the weather for tomorrow? And it's the same. It's in the 90s, like just about everywhere in the country right now, with storms in the afternoon, and the storms roll in at 3 o'clock, and that's the day.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about today's guest.
Let's do it. Let's get into it.
So, Shamira, over the years, you've heard me talk a lot about the fun of this industry, not being directly about photography, but the relationships that come out of everyone's love for the craft. And today's guest is a perfect example of supporting that comment as well as a testimonial to the fun of social media. Jim Graham is in the house, and here's the short backstory. Scrolling through Facebook, I ran across a stunning fine art image of his and contacted him for permission to post it on my blog. That led to a few phone calls, and with each conversation, it was one of those, I feel like I've known this guy forever talks, which in turn led to talking about mutual friends, and finally to both of us sort of admitting that neither of us know what we want to do when we grow up. So Jim started out as a photojournalist. His work has been published in dozens of magazines, as well as being nominated for a Pulitzer. I knew his name was familiar when I saw in his bio he'd been featured in After Capture magazine, which George Varanakis and I started back in our rangefinder days. So his skills as a photojournalism somehow took him into the world of weddings, and it's where he's been for the last 20 years, but he never lost touch with or his passion for diversity. And wandering through his website, I found stunning fine artwork, editorial, corporate work, equine photography, all with a unique approach to capturing the excitement of steeplechase. So today we're going to have some fun. It's going to be a different kind of podcast because, like so many of us, Jim is thinking about what should I do next? And that's our topic. So, Jim, this is the cue for your lips to move. Welcome to Mind Your Own Business.
Thank you so much for having me today, and I really do appreciate it. And it is so much about connections. I mean, we would be nowhere at all without our friends to help us, without the community around us to support us. And I'm just, I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, it's funny because as you and I were talking, we were both trying to figure out, or at least I was trying to figure out, come on, I know this name from somewhere. We must have met. And the more friends, Cliff Mountner jumped in there, Joyce Tennyson jumped in there. You were in and out of New York. Back in my Hasselblad days, you were involved with Rangefinder. And I don't think people on the outside realize this really is a relatively small industry. And Shamira, I guess we got to let you get a word in, huh?
My goodness. Yeah. Jim, I'm actually I'm speechless a bit because I knew some about you, but listening to Skip's intro of you, my goodness, you've had quite the career. That's an understatement to say you've had quite the career. But for those listeners who may be just getting familiar with you, can you kind of give us a brief overview of your background and how you ended up where you are today?
Well, it's actually kind of all by mistake in a way. Growing up, I had always played with a camera and never really knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. My mother thought I should be a banker or a lawyer, and I went to college down in Maryland at a little school called Washington College, which is, I think it only had 750 people there, and I became the school's photo editor at its magazine. I had learned photography when I was in high school. I'd learned some of the basics of photography. In fact, the first time I'd gone out to take pictures, I had told a teacher that I knew what I was doing because I had taken a class in 7th grade on how to develop film. And she handed me 2 boxes of Triacs. And I went out and photographed a field hockey game. Not knowing what I was doing, I just put the film in the camera and shot it, ran back to the darkroom at school, and developed it. And everything was blurry. Everything was horrible. And I looked at the back of the box because I couldn't figure out what I had done wrong. And I had a science teacher who always said, when all else fails, read. And so I read the back of the box. And the back of the box had the Sunny 16 rule on it and what to do if there was action. So I set the camera that way, went back and shot the second roll of film, got really good pictures, and have been taking pictures ever since. My college days, I graduated from college with a history degree, didn't know what in Dickens' name to do. That summer I was waiting tables, and my father was kind enough to help me make a contact with a lawyer at the DuPont company, and I became a legal consultant, going up to New York, crawling under subway cars, and documenting motor control boxes that had wires short out in them. And the city of New York was suing a Delaware company because they said that the polymer on the wires, the rubber on the wires, was the wrong one, and the company was saying, yeah, but that's what you told us we wanted. Anyway, wow. I had to go up every other day for the company, and I started reading, I think it was American Photographer magazine. I saw an article about Tony Edgeworth. And in that article about Tony, who was from Dover, Delaware, and I started looking at his history and saying, well, gee, if he's from Delaware, maybe I could actually do this. Look at everything he's done. And in it was a little blurb about the Maine Photographic Workshop. And I decided then and there that I was going to go to the Maine Photographic Workshop and take their resident program in photojournalism. The Maine Photographic Workshop today is the Maine Media Workshop, still in Rockport, but it's also Rockport College as well now. And so I went up for 4 months, and did that, and came home with those skills, started at the News Journal in Wilmington, Delaware, started working with a man named Pat Crow and Fred Comages and Bobby Herbert, and became a photojournalist.
Wow.
What a great foundation.
Oh, it really was. I mean, so Pat won NPPA's Picture of the Year in 1976. Fred won it a little bit later on, and Chuck McGowan, who was also a staff photographer, was second in the very early days of the contest. So I had wonderful mentors, along with some of the other photographers that were there. And, you know, they helped me get to a point where I wound up getting nominated, as you had said before, for the Pulitzer. I won Southern Photographer of the Year, and did well the couple times that I entered in Atlanta. And so I've been very, very fortunate. And I think more, though, not so much fortunate in the images that I make or have been given. I've come to think of imagery in terms of I'm given that imagery. I don't really make it. I just have to be aware enough to receive it, if that makes any sense.
I love that.
We're all given gifts throughout our life, and I think of a really good image as a gift, but I have a responsibility to share it. So, but I've met all kinds of people that way.
Well, it's a great way to look at it. In fact, that leads right into where I wanted to go next. Before we really start to get into, all right, so what do you want to do next? Just look back over the years, and if you were going to pick out 1, 2, or even 3 important lessons you learned through all the experience of everything you were doing, what would they be?
Well, when I started out, I wanted to be a lot like Fred Comages. And Fred made these wonderful images, and he was kind of brash, and he did show you how to be kind, but still assertive. But then Pat Crow taught me to be gentle and kind and giving. And he taught me that when someone gives you something, not that you have a debt, but it's always good to pay it forward. And so I've always tried, when, as Pat put it, you know, someone will come to you and ask you for help, you'll know what to do. And I think that is the most important thing with whenever you're doing any kind of portraiture or any kind of work with people, is that be gentle, be kind. And I think that there's some of us that forget to do that. We're so focused on making great imagery that we forget that lesson. And then you talked a little bit about the steeplechase and some of my equestrian work. And when I left the newspaper in 1994, I had to go out and find something for myself to do. And I started a self-project out in Unionville, Pennsylvania, and I started to follow a fox hunt. And the master once looked at me and said, "Jim, as long as you do your best, I'll always invite you back." And every time I go out to do a job, I hear Mrs. Hannum's words in the back of my head saying, "Jim, as long as you do your best, I'll always invite you back." And I really don't like rejection. So be kind and do your best, really. I mean, but don't
great
lie
lessons.
down on your back.
That fits.
It does, and that translates over perfectly to the next question that I'm curious about, Jim. The whole topic of being kind and gentle and giving it cannot be overstated how important that is. And I'm curious how that translates over to when you are building relationships with your clients. How does that play out with every shoot or every assignment that you do?
Well, in some ways, most of my clients over the years, honestly, have been friends. I was very fortunate while I was at the News Journal. You do, let's say at the News Journal, you would do 4 assignments, at least 4 assignments a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, where you'd meet 2 to however many people, and they'd all remember you because you put them in the paper. And so I sort of had a client base in a way when I left. And, people would call and you would always try to meet their needs to the best of your ability, to not overstate what it is that you could do for them. But also I always felt there are a lot of guys who want to take as much money as possible out of every client's pocket. But I also found over the time that method meant that they might use you once. But if you were fair and you were honest and you gave them a good product and you didn't try and take every penny, you left a couple pennies there, they come back to you over and over and over again. And so that's part of building that relationship where they know you're going to treat them honestly and you're not going to try to take everything in their mother, and they'll come back to you over and over again. You just are kind and you're personable.
Well, that really hits it too.
And Wilmington, I live just outside of Wilmington, Delaware. Wilmington is still sort of is, a small town. In one way or the other, everybody knows you. But it also can be a big place that has lots of connections. One of my early connections in a way is the guy that's sitting in the White House right now. Joe, I grew up covering Joe when he was a young senator, and I was a young photographer. So I have a bunch of imagery of Joe. So, that was a great entree because I got to meet all the dignitaries that came into Wilmington. So one thing leads to another.
Oh, it sure does. So let's switch gears and go right after what started the idea to do this podcast today. You made a comment to me, which I hope you'll repeat, about the challenge in working with brides today. Would you repeat that?
Well, one thing that I found, and I've gotten to not that it's ancient, but the ripe old age of 63. And a lot of times I feel as though I get I don't want to work with you. You're my father. Or in some cases, my grandfather. I want the cool guy with the knit cap. Or I want a female because she'll be able to relate to me in a better way. Which are all in some senses valid, except you're limiting the opportunity to get some really good pictures from a very experienced photographer. And I really do think experience counts. If you really look at it, how many times, Skip, have you gotten a call where somebody needed you to shoot something, or wanted photography, or needed advice on doing photography, and they'd already hired somebody to do the job? They didn't do it appropriately or well, and they needed somebody to actually make the pictures they needed. The problem with weddings is you only get one shot, and if you don't get it the first time, you don't get it.
That's right.
You don't have a second chance. That's where I've always thought that photojournalism prepares you so well to work in the wedding field. Back, you had said you didn't know how I got all those weddings. Well, one of the ways I got a lot of those weddings back in the day was I was part of a group called the Wedding Bureau that Alan Weiner and Michael Schwartz. Michael was a photographer for USA Today, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Times Union up in Rochester, put together a group called the Wedding Bureau, which was a group of photojournalists. And I think that, I forget how many Pulitzer nominations and how many wins we had amongst us, but it was in the high double digits, certainly. Pete Souza was one of our photographers. Pete was Obama's presidential photographer, as well as being Ronald Reagan's presidential photographer. And in fact, Pete was my second photographer on a wedding that I did down in the Plains, Virginia. So again, it was community helping community and helping the individual.
The other piece that comes out of being a photojournalist, and you said how many times have I gotten? Well, I don't get too many calls like that. What I get are the after calls where, especially when I was at Rangefinder, where somebody was contacting us, and because I was involved with Rangefinder and WPPI, they were upset over the job that the photographer they hired had done or not done, and were contacting us as if we were the arm of the law and could suddenly do something. And it doesn't happen with anybody, not with PPA. I mean, you hire a photographer based on all your feelings, and a lot of times those feelings are wrong, sadly, because of the way the photographer may have misrepresented themselves.
Correct.
Or maybe, a friend recommended them. However it happens, what you bring to the party as a photojournalist is the ability to tell the story. And that's when they talk about, well, I don't really think I want a photographer that reminds me too much of my dad.
Right.
Yeah, but whoever you're hiring, do they have the depth to tell the story? Do they have the depth to put it together? An album is not a book of pictures. It's the first family heirloom of a brand new family.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's so important to tell that story. But now take everything that you've got in there, and where are some of the areas that you're thinking about going next?
Well, some of it may be education and teaching more. I've been adjunct faculty at Delaware, at Widener University, at Moore College of Art and Design, and I've taught up at Maine Media for one class. And I would love to teach more in Maine Media. Again, it's the idea of giving back. Maine Media gave me that career, so I kind of would like to do that. I would, although I realize that there isn't a lot of money to be able to expand my fine art workshop or fine art photography career. I would love to be in galleries, because part of me, not that the career is over or I'm going to ever stop shooting. I can't and won't. But the idea of legacy is really important. So how do I, since I'm unmarried and don't have kids, how do I solidify at least my photographic legacy so that I do leave something behind? So working with galleries is kind of important to me. I still love working in magazine work. And quite honestly, if a newspaper that still understood how to use photography came to me tomorrow and said, Jim, we we want to hire you, I'd go in a heartbeat. I'd go in a heartbeat. But sadly, you look at the one chain that I came out of, and they had a bad second quarter, so they're apparently going to do more layoffs. And the newsroom that I worked in had 140 people in it. Today, that newsroom has 25.
Wow.
And it was the paper of record for the state. And today, the state has no daily newspapers anymore. That paper's gone down, and I think it cut its Saturday paper.
Wow.
And even a reporter from that same institution said, "Jim, we're not a newspaper anymore. We're a website."
My goodness. Yeah.
And so it's that kind of thing where, you see the New York Times, which is still a really robust newspaper, and the Washington Post, which is a really robust newspaper, and a couple of the larger metro papers that still get it from a photojournalistic standpoint. They would be wonderful to work at. But at 63, the chances of me honestly getting a job are minimal. So I have to do something where I know I can be an independent contractor and contribute. And so, honestly, when you say, well, what do you want to do next? How do I cultivate? And also I'll answer that with a question. How do I cultivate what I am and who I am in order to reach the most people and open the most doors, and show them that there is talent still here, and that talent wants to be used by somebody.
And
really, it goes back to I'm not ready to give in to that old song that was on, I forget the name of the album, but I think it was Jerry Garcia and a bunch of guys, and the song was called Olden in the Way. I'm not ready to go there yet.
Well, here's what I love about your website, as well as talking to you. You're not going there. Not at all. And the way to get the word out, it starts with, it's easy for me to say this. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm going through some things now where I'm trying to decide, all right, what do I want to do next? I used to jump out of bed every morning and run to the computer and jump into whatever I was working on. And I feel myself slowing down. And it's not aging. It's that, boy, it's time for something new to jump in here. It's time for me to do something different. And you kind of recognize it. So the way you get it all out there is to start letting more people know what you're doing next, and then you start to utilize your network. The minute you have your first class, wherever you're teaching, I will blow that out everywhere, and I told you that.
Yes.
Your work is that good, your style is that good, and it starts with, and everybody's in the same boat on this, because I've met photographers that are in their late 20s, and after 5 years of heavy wedding business, or because of the pandemic, a lot of people felt like they had burned out, and my business just dried up. Where do I go next to jumpstart it? So it's not just a matter of this is my career, and now after all these years it's time to change. It could have been that you had a thriving business 3 years ago that disappeared because of the pandemic, and now it's just time to jumpstart it again.
Agreed. And the pandemic has changed a lot of things for a lot of people. It really, truly has. And I do recognize that. But in some ways, I know that as a newspaper photographer, when I left the paper, I found that I needed to reinvent myself. And it really, I know that took a turn for the positive when I went up and took a workshop with John Paul Caponegro, and started to see myself as an artist, as an artist, as well as what I was taught at the newspaper, which was you're a shooter. And I remember my boss saying to me one time, look, Jim, your work belongs in the paper one day and in the cat's pan the next. And I felt incredibly justified when I went to do an assignment the day after I'd been nominated for the Pulitzer, and they'd run a story on me in the newspaper, and it was on the front page, along with a little mugshot of me. Wow. And I went in to do a picture of this lady, and she had me come in through the kitchen for whatever reason, and she had a cat span in the kitchen, and there was the newspaper, and there was my picture, and there was the cat. Taking care of business.
Come on.
And so, automatically what my boss had said, there it was.
Wow.
And so how fulfilled was I? But Caponegro really helped me understand that I was more than just that I was a photographer, that I maybe saw things in a different way. And I know that for years after that first workshop with him, my work grew exponentially because I could build on what I had and took it even further. And I truly believe that for all of us, we should never, ever stop trying to learn. But two, workshops for photographers in places like Maine or Santa Fe or the one in Italy, Toscana, or I believe there's a really good one in, what is it? Is it the Rocky Mountain Workshop, Skip?
Oh my God!
I think there's one in and I think that there's one in LA, but I think that those workshops, those week-long workshops that are immersion workshops, where you're with people of like mind, can give you so much to make your work better. I really truly believe in them. That we always have a chance to be better, and we should never stop trying to learn. And but you're just going to be a better photographer and a better person because of it.
Absolutely. And well, Jim, you mentioned your fine art photography, and I had a lot of fun looking through your galleries. Thank you. I'm curious, briefly, I can't help but ask, what is your favorite subject matter that kind of lights you up right now, or what are you exploring?
Well, honestly, and I haven't had a chance to go back for a little while, but the thing that really seemed to get me going was going to Iceland back in 2005 and 2008, I think was the first trip, and making, I think it's 8 or 10 trips there, and then going to Greenland, and then going to Antarctica. And it is, I think what I've come to understand is that I'm taking pictures of things that won't be there shortly after I leave, things that are disappearing. Just as with some of my equestrian work, like with the fox hunt, it's something that's a throwback to the past. So I'm doing things that are of time past. So with the Arctic, the ice, the formations of the ice, and you can draw a line to climate change and talk about the fragility of it all. And I think that sort of goes along with the idea of what I studied in college, which was history. So I'm a historian. I'm still really journaling. I'm documenting, but I'm doing it in an artful way.
Talk about a legacy, huh?
Yeah.
That's a perfect fit.
If going up and shooting the Arctic, or the Antarctic for that matter, you could take a picture one day and, there was a piece of ice that broke off while I was in Antarctica. The captain came over the loudspeaker as we were floating past it or sailing past it and said, right now, this is the 23rd largest thing on the face of the earth. And then he said, and in 2 weeks, it won't exist anymore.
Wow.
And does that make a statement?
Yeah.
It really does. And where we are today, and as Skip was talking about the weather earlier, and we're sitting here sweltering, I'll take your 65-degree weather any day of the week, just so you know.
No, I love it. I love
it. But that idea of immortalizing something with an image. And in today's, in the old days, it would have been on film. And in today's world, it's with digital. But I truly believe, honestly, that making that digital image isn't the last thing. I still believe in printing. Mm-hmm. And printing is really important to me. It's part of the fine art process. And it really, when you either make a silver print or you make a giclée, that's a way to finalize what you saw. Or better yet, too, what you felt. Because as storytellers and as visual communicators, our imagery is how we communicate. I remember sitting with Bob Gilka, who was the head of the photography department at the National Geographic. And Gilka was one of my teachers at the Missouri workshop one time. And he looked at me and he said, Jim, if you've got to explain your picture or make excuses for it, I shouldn't be looking at it.
Wow.
It needs to speak for itself. And so many times today, I see students or I see photographers that want to give you a tome to read about their pictures so that you can understand them, or for that matter, to justify them. And I think that we're missing what it means to truly be a visual communicator, because you're not truly telling a story with your image, which is what our job is. And your viewer may understand your story from your image, or they may create a story of their own. Mm-hmm. In either way, you've involved and you've enlisted your viewer in your possibility, and that image is your possibility. And the wonderful thing about enlisting someone in your possibility is that it creates an opportunity. And opportunities can lead you anywhere.
Do you know that I had another 3 or 4 questions I wanted to put in today's podcast, and we're actually out of time, and we're going to go over a little bit, but that's okay. It's our podcast. But you've hit on so many appropriate points for everybody to think about in terms of, and if you're not in this position, you will be at some point, in terms of what do I want to do next, and what's the path I take. And it always includes a look in your rearview mirror, which is helpful, because to know where you're going next. It's kind of nice to know, what have I done and where have I been and what have I learned from everything behind me. Mm-hmm. And I hate the fact that we're out of time. I'm going to turn it over to Shamira for our favorite closing question, but you have shared just an incredible amount of great points for people to think about. So whether it's a career change or a major change, or like I said, you're just trying to jumpstart your business again, this is all good stuff. So Shamira, it's all yours.
Yeah, our favorite final question is always a loaded one, especially as times change. Jim, we're curious, what advice would you have for photographers who are just starting out today? What would you tell them to do to get started?
If I was going to tell a young photographer or anyone what to do to be a photographer, the first thing that I would say was, 1, take a class or 2 in communications, and 2, take a business class.
Yes.
Learn the business and learn communications, because in the long run, you really are a marketing person and you're a communicator, and you have to be able to do both. And you've got to be able to run a business. That's my biggest weak point, to be totally honest, is that I run it by the seat of my pants. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing. I just go by my gut. I've been really fortunate so far, but I would have been so much further along if I had that skill set.
I can't think of better advice. My goodness, that is perfect. And that you're right. I mean, that can make or break a business, a photography business, lack of knowledge of business and communication. So
I've always said that, and I don't want to make this a long story, but it's a little bit long story. There was a sculptor here. He was the sculptor. His wife ran his gallery. His wife did his marketing. He was the product. She sold him. Mm-hmm. I've always wanted a her.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Excellent advice. And
Good stuff.
These episodes, our chats go by way too quickly. We are indeed
I'll do another one.
Just about, we'd love to have you back.
Be careful what you wish for.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. And we do want to make sure and ask Jim, where can folks check you out online?
You can find me on Instagram at Delaware Photo, at Jim Graham Photography, and at Jim Graham Fine Art, all on Instagram. You can find me at jimgraham.com. You can find, and that will take you to a general landing point. If you want to look for Jim Graham Weddings, you can find that too. And I'm on Facebook as Jim Graham Delaware.
Perfect. We'll make sure to include those in the show notes. And Skip, where can folks find you?
It's always the same answer. Everything I write is at skipcohenuniversity.com. My email is skip@mei500.com. We'd love to hear from everybody out there if you've got ideas or suggestions on guests or topics. And I'm Skip Cohen on Facebook and Skip Cohen on Twitter. And it's the same question I ask you every month. Shamira, where do they go to find you?
Folks can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That's my first name, CHAMIRA@photofocus.com. Please send me your questions, your ideas, nominate other photographers that you'd like us to interview, because all of your feedback really it shapes how we move forward with the show. And Jim, we just want to thank you again. This has been awesome. Thank you for chatting with us.
You shared.
My pleasure.
You shared
thank you.
So much great insight.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Yes. Excellent stuff. And we want to thank our listeners for joining us as well. Please tell your friends about this podcast, especially if they want to bring their photography business up to the next level and beyond. We look forward to having you all with us next time on the Mind Your Own Business podcast, brought to you by Photo Focus and Skip Cohen University.